When it comes to selecting coating, it all starts with understanding your application. What interactions will your device have with the body? What will it come into contact with? How long will it be used? What are the risks with an adverse reaction to the device and to the device surface? What are the expected off-label uses or indications you need to be concerned with? What are your materials and substrates? At Smart Reactors, we initially perform a deep dive to determine what an ideal coating would look like on a device, what benefits it could bring, what risks it could introduce, and ensure that the correct solution is designed in. And this works best when we engage with R&D teams in the earlier stages of their development to avoid costly redesign and redevelopment steps later on. It's important to understand the application process for a coating, to understand when during the manufacturing process you can apply the coating to minimize subsequent handling. And what's really important is that costs can begin to creep up very fast beyond material cost when you look at waste of coating materials. So it's important to understand the total expected cost of applying a coating, and it's challenging to do this by simply looking at a price per gram of a coating. So what really matters is the long-term unit cost, including waste, including process time, and including capital equipment. So depending on the materials that have to be coated, one has to look at the chemical compatibility between the solvents and the substrates. The scale of the application process needs to be planned in pretty early so you understand your floor footprint, particularly in your clean rooms, and you have to understand the time it takes to process a lot, the level of automation and the level of investment. Clean room compatibility is a requirement for all equipment and all coating processes, so this has to be understood very, very early when selecting a coating. Chemical handling can be very challenging and very expensive. Solvent handling, explosive rated equipment, waste disposal, these are all things that can lead to expensive corrections if you don't plan for them early. When you're picking a coating, it's important that you have biocompatibility data. There are a lot of coatings that have early proof of concept work. These tend to come out of universities, but they often lack the ISO 10993 biocompatibility data that you're going to need to gain regulatory approval for your device with the coating. So when you're selecting a supplier, it is important that you make sure they have that biocompatibility data on file. It's also very important to ensure that all reagents, all consumables, everything that comes in contact with that chemical process is of an appropriate grade and that there is a robust supply chain. The regulatory approval process for a device is already very complicated, and adding a coating can make this more difficult, or it can make it simpler. For certain applications, regulators expect to see coated devices, and they will look for you to compare your performance against a device that already has a coating. So it's important to understand the implications of a coating your device and to approach your notified body or regulator during the early R&D stages to get their perspectives on this. To evaluate a coating, again, it all comes back to application, because what happens here determines how you evaluate your coating. You have to relate your application back to the coating. So getting a coating on the device is always the first step, and we do that during early feasibility studies. Broadly speaking, our studies are separated into a number of stages. We initially look at coverage. We look at making sure that all target substrates and all geometries allow the coating to adhere. That's step one. We then look at optimizing the coating thickness. Particular applications have very specific requirements here. For example, perfusion oxygenators need a very thin coating to allow gas exchange. You also have to consider durability, so the degree of cross-linking and how the coating will hold up to the expected shear flow in blood, or the mechanical stresses during manufacturing, or the deployment forces that it's going to see while being implanted into the body. So we have to look at mechanical forces, and we have to ensure that the coating is robust to those. We also look at the performance of the coating on a specific device, and we'll do that during hemocompatibility studies and endothelialization studies during benchtop testing. When these steps are complete, it then becomes more practical to move to more advanced development, where we look to scale up the process, where we look to confirm on a near final device design in animal studies. And we at Smart Reactors then prepare a technology transfer pack. We will set this up and we will transfer the process to the customer site. We will ensure that they're trained to coat and that they're able to coat. And while our customer works on scale up and getting their regulatory approval, we provide ongoing support on a technical basis and to answer any challenging regulatory questions that come up to ensure success of the project.